Hi, this is a quick video to give you some tips about travelling to Karijini. Just returned from a 14-day trip from Perth to Karijini, driving. So I'll break the tips into three sections. So one, getting there, two, the actual Karijini, shall we say, and three, just general observations and particularly camping related. So one, getting there. Firstly, recommended to, if driving, it took 3 full days of, say, 3 8-hour days of driving, thereabouts, with breaks, etc., to drive from Perth to Karijini. So you can stay each night. So our plan was basically to drive during daylight hours to avoid the risk of dusk wildlife, lots of kangaroos, lots of roadkill, unfortunately, and also poor visibility during the darker hours. So with sunlight, no problem. Tips though, drive with someone else. Obviously it's very risky to go by yourself. With that person, ensure that they're someone you can trust, particularly with your safety. That's crucial. But there's also a lot of things. Music taste, I think, is important, to have a mutual understanding of how you guys are going to cooperate with regards to choices of music and discussion topics. Is one person more talkative than the other, and is that going to be okay? For one day, something that occurs one day can become quite problematic over several days. So ensure a good fit for your travel partner, particularly with safety. So little things with driving, if you take turns driving, which is recommended. What's the other person's risk profiles? Say overtaking, for instance. Do they have a reckless hunger to overtake everything, or are they afraid of overtaking? And conversely, you might be frustrated sitting behind a 40 kilometre driver in a 110 kilometre zone. So getting that fit is very important, but also crucial to enjoy the trip. A laugh goes a long way. A small laugh over a long trip is huge. So try and get that fit correctly. Some of the little tips we also did was to have the buddy system, work things out in terms of both have a key, particularly in a waterproof pouch if possible, just in case something was to happen. You've always got that backup. So that's the main with getting there, is try and have that buddy, organised travel, petrol station, try and map it out, because you might find a large gap between petrol stations can be frustrating. The timing of the travel is essential. For instance, we just travelled early June, which is wetter season, or just after the wet season, in fact. So roads can be closed because of flooding. It's always important to monitor those. We had 4 road crossings. We drove in a sedan, and so we had to then measure the muffler level. A good tip was when we approached the water was just to slow down, check one, water we could actually bypass by going around, and that was important, because why take the risk if you don't need to? Others, we just tried to stop, watch other cars go through. If there were no other cars, try and walk through it ourselves, ensuring to see not only the depth but the strength of the current. Some of the waterways can be quite strong, and then try and plan the route if we would drive through it such that we manage both the current and the depth. Looking and doing that by walking, as well as looking for the line. So if you can see the line on the road still, that's a good sign. Often we couldn't. Something to monitor, and as I said, it's sometimes better to double back and bypass troubled sections of road. Next, we'll talk about actual Karijini. Amazing. I consider myself fit, but I'm not a mountaineer or rock climber or anything of the sort. Nevertheless, I've really enjoyed myself. So, of the Karijini gorge, I've got this wonderful little pamphlet, which I found very helpful. There's a lot of great information. A lot of people will give you their tips, and I found that the people that work there, they always had a favourite trail. Yet finding the information yourself is part of the journey, and that's important. So this free pamphlet, for instance, Karijini National Park, produced by the Departments of Parks and Wildlife, has a wonderful map, but also underneath is an explanation of the the trail classifications, class 2 to class 5, class 2 being easier, basic walking, versus class 5 being quite challenging, as I mentioned, such as rock climbing and traversing obstacles. Down below though, they've split the Karijini National Park into sections and colour-coded that according to the class. As I said, I think class 2 is generally a walk, so bushwalking. Still important at that level to remember the different conditions. So a walk in the park is much harder in very dry, hot conditions, and particularly at Karijini, water is a challenge, so it's recommended to bring 3 or 4 litres of water with you on all these pamphlets. And I have to say, it is essential. You really do become much more dehydrated more quickly in those conditions than you would otherwise, or than I have otherwise. So that's important. The water, you can't get your own fresh water. But I did find at Karijini, the Echo Retreat, there's 2 camps around the Dales area, which is very basic, and the Echo Retreat, which is also very basic. But the Echo Retreat main difference is that it has showers, proper bathrooms. When I say proper bathrooms, relative to the conditions, and also has fresh water, so you can drink the water at the Echo Retreat and refill your water bottles, which is recommended to do often. The Echo Retreat is also located closer to some of these trails than the others, so we planned our trip to stay at Dale's camp area, to do the Dales area, which is the circular pool and fern pool and some nice walks along the gorges and above the gorges. Whereas the Echo Retreat, I was told it is the hardest area, and I agree with that. It's a bit more class 5 orientated. So for instance, let me break that down for you. The Dales Gorge area, I found that there was a nice easy walk above the gorge, but you had to be very careful because there's no handrails and you could easily fall over. The rocks and the terrain can be crumbly, so you have to be very careful. Even though it looks stable, it may easily fall, or you may fall, trip, whatever, and you're in a very precarious position. Thus, must be very careful. Nevertheless, the actual walking, apart from the high risk because you're next to an exposed cliff edge, is pretty simple. Very, flat ground, not much terrain and not many obstacles to worry about. Always be cautious of snakes and the like, but generally it's pretty standard, and I expect most people to be able to cope with it. Then they have stairs, and they've got man-made stairs or ladders. I pretty much think they're stairs for the Dales area, and you can walk down those, so then fitness and coordination becomes perhaps the challenging or the limiting step there. Most people could possibly manage that, depending on your fitness level. But then once you're down into the actual gorge, you can walk on one end, I think the west end, but don't quote me on that. So one end, say the west end, is the circular pool, very nice. And then you can walk all the way along the gorge to the other end, which is the fern pool. And that's both the swimming areas really, but I found fern pool much better for me to swim because it was closer to the exit. So once you swim in these conditions, even though it was 25, 26 degrees, you can get quite cold in the gorges, I found. So important to be able to easily get out and get to higher ground, warmer clothing and warmer weather. So between the 2 gorges in Dales, I'd also suggest it's class 4, but there's a lot of rock hopping, and that can be quite tricky for some, particularly with slips and falls, because there might be a bit of moss, a bit of moisture, depending on the time of day and the weather particularly. The rocks might be slippery, so something to keep in mind. But it is generally marked, and there was a lot more. I found there was a lot more people in Dales area, so easy to follow. So that moves us to the Echo Retreat area, and that I'll read some of the main ones here. So the first one that we began with, and I don't know if this is the right idea, I think it was the hardest. Joffrey Falls was the descent actually into the waterfall, into the gorge. I found that really challenging. It began with a class 4 walk, which was okay, but there are some slippery spots and you have to be very careful. But then it changes into a class 5 descent down into the gorge. Why that becomes very tricky is because any slip, the severity of a fall when you're on the gorge face is significant. It is death. People have died around that area, unfortunately, tragically. So you have to be extra cautious, and there are some tricky spots where you have to move to a ledge, just side, I guess, step side to navigate through some of the ledges. So something to keep in mind. And then when you reach the gorge floor, it's quite a beautiful waterfall, and everyone has their own favourites. I wasn't particularly enamoured with the Joffrey Falls, but I can see how beautiful it would be if there was a lot of rain, etc. prior. So each to their own. The next two main walks or main paths in that area are the Hancock Gorge and also the Lower Weeno Gorge. So I'll explain Lower Weeno. Lower Weeno has a class 4 walk one way within the gorge, and also has a class 5, it's called the handrail pool, so class 5 area to navigate. The walk in itself is, once again, it's similar to the Dow's Gorge walk of class 4, but it's a bit more overgrown. The class 5 section, which I'll focus in on, has a lot of getting wet. Same, you have to be prepared for the Echo Retreat area to get wet, but the handrail pool particularly is, it begins with wading. For me, I'm 6'2", I was wading through waist deep water and walking through very cold water and slippery rocks. So it's okay to walk in, I found, but as I was exiting, I did slip over, because you walk maybe, say 15 metres through, and you can see the water, see through the water, the rocks, and you can see where you need to step. It's okay. Then you climb onto a rock, say maybe about there, and which is pretty easy because there's little steps to get to that, and then you on the reverse you return, and so when you return, it's quite hard to see where you entered. So it's harder to find I found it was harder to see harder to find even footing and steady footing on the return, so something to be wary of. With shoes as well, it's important to know. I would take my shoes with me, and I'm really glad I did. So I'd take my shoes off. Some people would leave them there and then continue barefoot, but I would find that to take your shoes off to walk through the water, even to keep them on, might be an idea because it is that slippery, but I would take them off, put them around my neck, so I'd have both hands free, very important in case you were to fall, then traverse the water obstacle, then put my shoes back on, and that was invaluable in many spots. The one spot I didn't do that, I slipped, because your feet just get worn out from a lot of the terrain. So for instance, as I said, the handrail pool, you have this first water hazard you walk through, and then you have a lot of just basic bushwalking, and it's quite nice until you reach the inside the gorges, which is absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. I'm not even mentioning how beautiful it is, because when you see it, you'll just be blown away. My words can never capture that beauty. So you get inside the handrail pool, and then that's when you really need some shoes, I think, or grip, because it is so slippery, hence the name handrail pool. You'll be holding, I'll put this down for you so I can demonstrate. You'll be holding the handrail with both hands. It's absolutely essential, because the floor is so slippery. It is worse than ice, I assure you. And from experience, I assure you that the ground is quite hard from falling. I wasn't the only one to fall. Many people fell. That's why it's important to have both hands free, and the basic level of fitness is beyond what you can do. It's also being able to handle falls, trips, and being aware of getting wet. So having a dry bag for anything valuable. So for instance, keys, especially with the electronic keyless entry type keys, you don't want to ruin your set of keys and then not be able to go anywhere. So dry bags are recommended. Even if you plan to stay above water, things can happen. Then so returning, that's Lower Weeno, and then the final gorge I'll mention at around Echo Retreat is Hancock Gorge, and oh my goodness, it is beautiful. Hancock Gorge has the famous Spider-Man walk. So basically, I was walking through the cliff by using your feet. See, the walls are so narrow that you can't really move side to side. It would just be very, very difficult and too slow. So you put your one foot on each side of the walls and you can walk along. In other areas, you do have to do the Spider-Man walk along the side. Other people choose to swim through it. It's quite cold, freezing in fact. I think it would be possible, but I'd recommend wearing a wetsuit. Oh, it definitely is possible, but I'd recommend wearing a wetsuit. And it's a different experience, of course, but whatever you choose, be aware that there's still danger involved, because wading through, you have to wade through the water and then travel further deeper into the gorge, and it can get quite cold. So you have to manage that risk of hypothermia, and it is a real risk in these environments. But basically, if you manage to get through the Hancock Gorge, you'll reach Kermit's Pool. It is breathtaking once again, amazing, and there's a real sense of achievement when you reach some of these places. That said, no need to push it. I think that some of these class 5 trails were beyond me. I was fortunate. That was me pushing. I felt comfortable with class 4. Class 5 was a huge stretch, but I was with a very well-trained, safety-conscious friend who would look after me if anything went wrong. So that gave a lot more confidence than I would have had with perhaps myself or other people. I wouldn't even recommend. For me, I wouldn't do it by myself. I think it's important just to have a buddy in case anything goes wrong, because the response, there's obviously trained staff there, but the next nearest hospital I think is in Tom Price, so that's maybe 12 hours or so response time. I spoke to the ranger who mentioned that there's usually a serious incident which requires someone to be stretched out once every 2 weeks. So as it's a very peak holiday season, that's quite important to remember that it may be even more frequent during that time, because that's there are a lot of people with varying backgrounds, varying skill levels, so it's important to take care of yourself and have your buddy there too. So that will hopefully give you a better idea of the actual place. Now, the final section, I'll just mention some general tips that I found could be very helpful and would have been helpful to me if I was there. Number one, the fueling. As I said, if you see a fuel station, probably take it. You don't know how long the gap will be. Some of the places, for instance, we thought, okay, on the map, Google Maps, for instance, said there was a petrol station, and there was, but it might be diesel only, or it may be closed at that particular time, or there may be other obstacles in the way. So, for instance, we had to reroute our journey because of a water hazard, so that meant we'd miss one of the planned stops. Food-wise, I found that timing once again is important. So Parabidoo, there's a beautiful IGA there, and when we went through there on the way in, it was closed, so we couldn't get supplies. So I basically had, when you're in the park, Karijini, you're pretty much self-sufficient. There are restaurants there, but quite expensive. Coffee, for instance, at the Echo Retreat starts at $6, bargain. And there are other things there, but I wouldn't want to rely on that unless you had an unlimited budget. So if you bring your own food, there are facilities there, but for me it was very basic, so I was eating canned food, and it would have been great to be able to stock up at Parabidoo because there's lots of fresh produce and a range of long life canned items beyond what I had. So it was a very Groundhog Day with food for me, but I still made it through. Water-wise, it was okay as well, because I brought a lot of refillable bottles and could refill them at Echo Retreat, or there's another place near the visitor centre that you can fill up your water bottles. Another tip would be definitely when you're there is if you can manage the waterproof shoes or waterproof socks, because as I said, some of these class 5s, the water hazards are just, some you can choose to go in or to take a risky climb across a cliff, against the gorge, but some of them you're inevitably going to get wet, and if you can find a way to keep your shoes dry and grippy, that's a wonderful start, because drying the shoes, I found that the night's incredibly cold, around 8 degrees, which doesn't sound like much, but there's a huge wind chill factor, which I could never find out what it was, but it was very cold in the mornings. But by, say, sunrise, say 7, so by 9, I'd wear 5 layers at night when I was sleeping in a tent, but by 9 o'clock, say, I was easily in shorts and a shirt. So when walking above the gorges, inside the gorges, it was a bit different. It can be cooler or hotter depending on the situation. But it was important to drug up, definitely, and also to be able to shed those layers quickly because of the huge variance in temperatures and the range between the two. But stock up at Paraburdoo if you can, because that's, to me, the nearest sort of shopping centre with a nice range of food. Also, when you're there, just to appreciate the time you're there, remember that rubbish bins are a luxury, so there is one rubbish collection point inside the park. It's recommended that you bring your own bags, and they can supply some, so Eco Retreat supply some plastic bags, fun enough, ironically plastic bags, but nevertheless, you take your own rubbish, you pick it up, and so you need some storage in the car, preferably away from the driver's seat, because you don't want the smell permeating through the vehicle. But you'll pack up your rubbish and you'll take it with you. So for us, we were there for 4 days straight, just to explore it before we went to the bin area. Is sort of out of the way. For me, if you're at the Eco Retreat, it's close to the Dales, so you don't really want to have to make a special bin trip without having other places to explore nearby. So just be prepared to carry a lot of rubbish, so try and use as little as possible. And it's also good to pick up other people's rubbish, which we did too. As you walk along, my friend found this incredibly ancient tin can, beer can in fact. I don't think it's even made. I tried to take a picture of it, see if that works out. So you'll find a range of rubbish which you can pick up. Nothing stops you with gloves, and I don't recommend cutting your hand on anything, of course, but if you see, I've found lots of cigarette butts, you can pick those up and put them in your bin too, and then when you throw it out, the Karijini becomes a little cleaner than when you began. So that's another general tip for you when you're there, to try and leave the place a little bit better than when you found it, and that helps everyone. So hopefully that's an exhausting explanation about Karijini and the trip there. Hopefully it's helpful. On the way back, have lots and lots of funny stories to share about the trip's highlights, what went well, what didn't go so well, what you'd do again, what you wouldn't do again, so many conversation topics, but also relaxing time, because it is exhausting in itself. You are doing a lot of physical activity, but you're also in a very different environment, very special environment, which is restorative and a healing place for many. So just on the way back, I wouldn't overload the itinerary of things to do. Give yourself some time to really process the whole experience of Karijini, because it's an incredibly special place. Enjoy, and hopefully you'll post a video of a place yourself that I'd like to visit one day, so I can check out your tips. Thanks, bye.